Joe, how's it going, man?
Very good. How are you?
Good. I'm loving this office space behind you.
Oh, thanks, dude.
There's all sorts of coolness going on.
This is my jam. I got my, this is some memorabilia. I do some memorabilia here. This is Young Frankenstein, my favorite movie. This is a signed LP from the whole cast. This is where I met Mel Brooks after a meet and greet at the Radio City Music Hall that I snuck into. This is an original drawing of one of my dogs, Biscotti. My fam's here. Everybody.
That's phenomenal. I love it. You've got the memorabilia. Mine is a little bit of a different kind of vibe, but you know.
Yeah. It's what? Both are great.
Right. Yeah. Funko Pops, the paintings of my cats that I found at Marshall's 3 weeks ago.
Oh, that's amazing.
That was a fun vibe.
I have an original piece of artwork of my dog, Biscotti, dressed as a queen on that wall over there. So
that's incredible. These were like $10 at, I think it was either Ross or Marshall's. And I later found out, I put it up on my Instagram, and the actual artists were on Instagram, and they like shot me over a message, and they were like, hey, like, we just saw that you put these up on your IG. Like, you know, we actually did these over like a year or two ago. Man. They made a bunch of them, and they just ended up at a Marshall's. So I mean, sometimes you create great artwork and it just lands at a discount store, I guess.
Great. I get all this artwork from people that draw like me or my dogs and stuff. And some of it is so great and some of it's just not. So and I find it either is or it isn't. There's like really no in between. Yeah.
See, if I were you, I would like put up a wall in your house that's just all of the really bad artwork.
I have some of it. I keep some of it.
It's just all the reject doodles of your dogs there. Oh, my gosh. Well, Joe, you've got all sorts of awesome stuff going on. Of course, September 7th, Hollywood Casino in Charlestown, West Virginia. You got the Let's Get Into It tour, your first ever comedy special dropping there on YouTube September 17th. You've got your podcast. I want to start with the podcast, by the way, because it's such a fun kind of niche thing that I feel like a lot of people have hopped on to, this really cool kind of vibe with two cool moms. For those that don't know what the podcast entails of, tell them a little bit. And I want to know what inspired getting you into kind of the podcast game a little bit.
Sure. I mean, I'm always looking for different ways to entertain and always have fun. And my friend Steve Byrne, who's my co-host there, a longtime friend and comedian, we were always looking for something to do together. So when my schedule opened up a little bit after I had left Jokers, he said, you want to try podcasting. So we started to podcast together. And we both realized quickly a lot of the conversations gravitated towards our mothers. And him and I are each other's real confidants. Like, whenever we had an issue or in both our friend circles, we'd be the people our friends would go to for help and answers. So we quickly realized that this maternal instinct that our moms had ingrained in us. So we decided we'd open it up to the world and help fans solve their dilemmas. And the first half of the podcast is us talking about anything and everything as comedians. And the second half, we take fan submitted dilemmas and try to help them to the best of our abilities. And it's been good because we've helped a lot of people, but also some of the answers we're just not very good at. So, the advice is good sometimes, not so good at others, but always entertaining. And I think that's what's important. So.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And as far as kind of some of the material from the podcast, have you found that it's kind of slowly migrated into some of the material for the stand-up show too?
Yeah, we do, touch on, because when you're talking, you're just spitballing and thinking about stuff. And if you're making your friend who's a comedian laugh, it's like, oh, there might be something there. So, and now that we're on iHeart, so we're part of the iHeart family now with the iHeart podcast. It's interesting to see like inside the corporate what like people take to. So it does inspire you to be like, oh, maybe I should try this out on stage, So one of my stories that's in the special actually started from me just telling Steve it. It's a story about how I scarred my son by taking him on the Star Wars ride when he was too young to understand that outer space didn't exist, and he really thought we got abducted by aliens. He had never seen a Star Wars movie, had never been on a ride, and the ride is that you like go into outer space, and he was yelling, I want to go back to Earth. And I just told Steve that story, and it turned into this 20-minute part of my my special that's in my special now, the messing with people. So it's really interesting to see how anything can inspire anything when you're inside the industry,
Yeah, I love that we all collectively have a traumatic story of our childhood of going to an amusement park or a theme park, though. I know exactly the ride that you're talking about, and Disney does an incredible job of making it so immersive that you do feel like you are going out into outer space. Dude, so as a kid, I can imagine.
Yeah, the people that work on the ride really sell it. Like it's an immersive experience. So my son was like, he's like, oh, these are really evil people from outer space that are just, they have kidnapped us, Dad, do something.
It's kind of like what I think was when I was 7 or 8 years old. My parents took me through my first haunted house, and somebody told me at the very beginning that they had a real live werewolf, and I was convinced. Again, I was a kid, and I heard the barking, and I ran. I just immediately ejected myself from my parents and booked it for the hills. So, I mean, everybody just kind of has that one traumatic experience from their childhood.
I think in kind, you're probably, when you were running through the haunted house, was scaring people. People were like, the scariest part was that kid that was running and screaming.
Right? They were like, was he part of the attraction? Deal? Like, is he on payroll?
I hope
we
they
don't really
paid
know
you
what's
and they
going on
broke you off a piece, man.
Oh my goodness. Well, Joe, I mean, you've obviously been prepping the comedy show. You've been prepping the comedy special that's going to be on YouTube here in a couple of weeks, but you've also been kind of diving into writing a children's book. Was this just kind of like the most dope summer for you? Because I feel like you've had just a whole pile of side quests going on in the last several months. A
lot of it's come together, which is great. I mean, the Where's Barry book that comes out, it comes out September 3rd, available for order now though, but it's been so fun to make. Like, the coolest part about it is, like, you have this idea, right? You have this story that you want to tell, and then you write it down, and then somebody actually illustrates it. And I was like, somebody made my boy a cartoon, made my dog a cartoon, my daughter, me, and like it's like so interesting to see like the whole how it goes. Like, your words inspire somebody to create real art. Like I said, that's going to be hanging on somebody's wall, and you could buy it Ross for less at someday. But I think it's just really cool. It was such a cool experience. It's a different world to get into and a different way to entertain, because I'm a dad, and like I read books to my kids. And back in the day, I used to sell kids books. I used to work at this baby store, and I used to like read all these stories, and I just always had an affinity for them. And to be able to be on, part of the bedtime routine for families is really cool to me.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, do you expect it to turn into potentially a series down the road?
I would love it. Yeah.
You just go into the whole side quest of being a children's author over the next several decades? Yeah,
because honestly, it's not that demanding if you're not drawing them. Right. So like it's a longer process, like, so it takes, a year and a half or whatever for them to get it together. Where it's been with Penguin for a little while. But like, once I write the story and I'm like, here's what it is, you do a couple of revisions of it, and then it's in the hands of the artist. And all you're doing is really giving feedback on the art, which is really cool to see somebody's interpretation of it. So I really enjoyed the process, and I wouldn't be surprised if I do a bunch of them, because it's just really fun. It's really like, I felt like I'm proud of the product. It's a good book, but also like I actively like children's stories. So it's feeding that part of my soul.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I feel like a lot of people, they pull inspiration from some of the books and stories from their own childhood as well. Was that kind of where you were at? Like, was there a particular book series or book from your childhood that you were like, you know what, like, this is the reason why I want to get into writing a children's book?
That's interesting. Yeah, I think it inspired my creative writing. So I love to write, and I was obsessed with choose your own adventure books. I'm older than you, but these were books where they were just these fantastical stories, a whole series. And it would tell you at the end, you'd have to make a decision. Like, if you want to go into the cavern, go to page 42. If you want to stay by the river, go to page 66. And it would just like, you'd have to make these decisions inside the books. And they were always kind of like fantastical in nature. And that really took to me. So that got my mind thinking that kind of way. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, and now they've turned the choose your adventure thing into a variety of different, means. Like, I think Netflix tried it with Black Mirror a couple years ago.
Yeah. And Bandersnatch or whatever it was. Yeah, you can like choose your own adventure on a movie and stuff. Yeah, I guess that mentality tried to translate. Yeah.
Right. And then kids were like, oh, wait, this is kind of a neat concept, which I love seeing, like, the younger generation now trying to kind of like attach to like things that, we all kind of experienced growing up. I know, like, at 29, it's funny to see like Gen Z and Gen Alpha start to adopt thinking that cassette tapes are cool.
Yeah, here we go. They're coming back, baby. You're going to see the Walkmans with the fuzzy orange.
Right. Yeah. And the one thing I saw was a kid was confused as to why they couldn't skip or why they couldn't shuffle. And I was like, well, they tried shuffling on tape players and it did not go over well. It just ate the tape.
You get the pencil in there and reset it.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's funny because when I'm on the road, I'll pop into like, vintage stores and whatever, and I'll look for choose your own adventure books. My daughter's 9 years old. So like, it's right kind of the time when I was doing it. I'm starting like a little collection of them. They like give her so she could read them. Because she's a reader and enjoys stories. So,
yeah, I loved those. I mean, I know at like 9 or 10 years old, I was really into like Captain Underpants and A Series of Unfortunate Events were like the only 2 book series that I dove into, which my like reading teachers were like, look, here's like Harry Potter, or like, here's, literally anything else if you'd like to go into either one of these. And they're like, instead of like going back and forth between traumatic and tragic to slapstick comedy with flip pages.
You're like, but Harry's wearing full pants, not just underpants.
Right. Yeah. And he's not like 500 pounds and saving the day. I just wasn't the kid that was into that kind of thing. So, but it's a wild thing. But, obviously with your stand-up show, it's kind of, I would imagine, an adaptation of just all sorts of different elements of your career. But take us through what to expect for those that are headed out there September 7th to Hollywood Casino.
Yeah, so the Let's Get Into It tour, I wanted to craft a little bit more about me now that we're diving into it. So people are, my fans are great. They followed me throughout my career, and now people coming out to see me. Now it's interesting because I've had this persona, and part of my personality is hugely, I'm just confident and a blunt force instrument in situations, So I decided I want to like kind of break it down in my progression of how I became who I am, right? So kind of like an evolution of man, because I was nerdy when I was younger. I used to write short stories. I tell stories about how I used to I used to play these adventure games by myself in my backyard where I would narrate these fantastical stories and just play them out. And then how I decided with my brain, I was able to make friends, and I take myself, through college. And then of course my career, how I was able to be confident in that and help me excel. And then now being a dad and realizing what happens with your kids when they're watching you, because I reflect on how my parents were, my crazy Italian mother and my very funny, confident father, so it just all takes you out through there. And I'm a storyteller. I love telling stories. I've had a very wild ride. So I love to share that with people. But most of all, I just want to get in a room and laugh with people. And that's the kind of culture and night I try to make happen. So that's the best part of performing live.
I love it, man. I mean, and it's going to be such a fun show. Before I let you go, I wanted to play along. Everybody tries to build kind of Mount Rushmores of all sorts of different things, all sorts of different categories and topics and subjects and whatnot. I want to know, if you had to build a Mount Rushmore of other guys named Joe, they could be singers, athletes, actors, whatever. If you could make a Mount Rushmore of famous Joes, who would you put in your Mount Rushmore? I'll do one too after yours.
Okay. So Mount Rushmore is 4. Am I one of them? No, it's 3. So it's 4 total. Okay. So I would probably say that's a great question. I've never gotten this, and I appreciate that. It's great when you're in interviews and you get questions you never got. I would say the first one that went to my mind was Joe Montana, because I wasn't a sports guy growing up at all, and I bought a Kansas City Chiefs starter jacket because Joe Montana. I used to play him in Madden. I don't play Madden anymore, but when I was younger, I used to play Madden, and I would always love to be Joe Montana. So I got to say, out of homage, it'd be Joe. The second guy I'd put is the guy named Joe that coffee is named after. Because that became a cup of Joe. And I don't know that story, who that is, but I love coffee. I have 3 cups a day, and it runs my life. So I would say that Joe's got to be on there. Also, because I'm a comedian, I would have to have Joe Mama.
That's totally fair.
Right? You need to have a Joe Mama, right? And then finally, a fourth one. Oh, yeah, you know what? I would probably go with this is interesting, but there was Joe Montoya, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, Joe Montoya. I would say Joe because that's a very fun name. Only because it's a fun name. I go by that. Yeah.
Right. It just rolls off the tongue super well. Yeah. It's a good kind of vibe.
Yeah, it's either that or I'd probably actually, you know what? If Montoya couldn't go, I'd probably put my dad. My dad was a Joe, and he's definitely done a lot in developing who I am. So Montoya's out. I'm going to go with Joe Gatto.
Perfect. You're like, well, we'll knock him out. We'll put dad in there. I'm here for it.
Yeah.
I think honestly, as somebody who grew up in Maryland, I'm going to have to go Joe Flacco.
Okay.
First.
Yeah.
We got to go with him.
Yep.
I would say maybe just because I grew up in the Disney Channel era, Joe Jonas. I would say we go Joe Jonas.
He's
Joe Flacco.
One of the best of the 3 brothers.
This is so true. I'd say maybe Joey from Friends. We'll add a Y there to the end.
You put a Y on it. Okay, I got you. Yeah. Way to think outside the box.
Right. And you know what? Since you couldn't do it, I'm going to put Joe Gatto there as my 4th.
I'm a good
so
company.
That you're on there. And you're in that Mount Rushmore, with the Jonas brother, with the guy from Friends, and the still playing quarterback in the NFL. Surprisingly enough,
yeah, that's great, dude. I'm happy to be there.
That's perfect, Joe. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat. Of course, September 7th, Hollywood Casino in Charlestown, West Virginia, with the Let's Get Into It tour. Congratulations on everything, and looking forward to seeing you out in West Virginia.
Yeah, I can't wait. That's the first weekend of this tour, so I'm really going to come out firing. So I'm super excited.